What's going on, everybody? I have Mike Craven here, covers college football, football in general, the Houston Cougars, for Dave Campbell's Texas football, everything related to Texas football. So we're going to talk about Shannon Dawson, Miami's new offensive coordinator. Mike, how's it going? I'm excited to get into this.
Yeah, it's going pretty good. Definitely some news this morning broke. We kind of knew it was coming a little bit, but yeah, happy for Shannon. He's been a great guy to cover, and I think y'all will enjoy him out there in Miami.
Obviously, we're going to get into some breakdowns of different position units. I'm very interested in talking about the quarterback, obviously. I guess just in general, how would you kind of summarize his style of play, his coaching philosophies, what he's looking to do scheme-wise?
Yeah, I mean, he's into an explosive offense. The last 2 years, they've ranked top 16th nationally. I think they're around 35 points, 36 points a game over the last 2 years. And so he likes to get the ball down the field. He likes an experienced quarterback. Every time I've talked to Coach Dawson, he's talked about how much experience they've had as a group, when they've had an experienced quarterback versus when they've had an inexperienced quarterback. Clearly, the last 2 years with Clayton Tune, they put up huge numbers. But if you go back to 2021, they were really good in the running game because they had Alton McCaskill, who was a true freshman, who was an excellent running back. He was hurt all of this year, so not as good running the ball maybe for Houston this year. But yeah, an explosive offense that gets the playmakers the ball, that goes down the field, and everything you think of as a typical air raid offense, they do that passing wise. But over the last 5, 6, 7 years, Dana Holgorsen really committed himself to running the football. And I think Shannon Dawson's been a great middle ground between the old school air raid principles and kind of that Gus Malzahn spread running attack. He kind of mixes both of those things in.
Yeah, and he was there for 4 years, the last 3 years serving as the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach. 20-7, you touched on the last couple of years. 20-7, won both bowl games. The impressive 2021 season there, finished top 20 in the country. He's got a Hal Mumme background. If you could speak on that and what that means, because I think sometimes we hear about the air raid, and there's different styles even within it. But that's his background, and I know a lot of college coaches who speak on it speak heavily of what Hal implemented years ago.
Yeah, so when you think of air raid, I think most of us think of Mike Leach. Well, Hal Mumme is Yoda to Mike Leach, right? Like Mike Leach learned it from Hal Mumme. Hal Mumme recruited Dana Holgorsen when Dana Holgorsen was playing high school football in Iowa to go to Iowa Westland. So these ties go really far back. Hal Mumme created this system at Coppers Cove High School here in Texas and kind of the central Texas area. So Mumme's, one of my favorite people in the whole world. And I think what he would tell you the air raid is figuring out space, trying to figure out how to get your best players the ball in space, and not just ball in space, but moving towards that space. And so what Houston has really done, I think, well over the last couple of years is completions and yards after the catch. They don't just throw to a spot and that, your 10-yard hook and you're going to get tackled. They try to develop route trees and route concepts to where when you get the ball, that's just the start of the play. After that, you can go and make plays afterwards. Nathaniel Dell, Tank Dell as a slot receiver really excelled in those moments. And so, yeah, they're going to move the ball around. They're going to spread the ball out. They're going to be in a lot of 20, 2-2 on each side. But I think that air raid has become more than that over the last decade and a half. It's now more of a running offense. Dana Holgorsen himself will joke about getting kicked out of the air raid because they run the ball too much. And so it's not a 90-10 pass the ball over the field, kind of Mike Leach, old school, early 2000s. It's gotten a lot closer to the middle. Think TCU with Garrett Riley, Houston with Shannon Dawson. I think they're becoming more probably 40-60 run pass balanced teams, but it's still a spread offense that puts the quarterback in easy positions, that doesn't run that many plays, but runs them out of a lot of different formations. And that makes it easier for the quarterback, in my opinion.
Mike, can you stay on that? Because with tempo, I think sometimes, I think sometimes people get caught up in these kind of offenses. Oh, they're just going to go tempo all the time. How would you kind of classify the tempo of a Shannon Dawson offense here?
I mean, it's faster than the ones we grew up in, right? There's not going to be huddles. They're going to get after it. But they're not one of the faster, teams in the net. SMU runs a much faster offense. Texas Tech ran a much faster offense within the state. They're one of those tempo teams that uses it when it's working. If they can get a first down or two, they will get into hyperdrive and go faster and faster. But they're not a tempo team just for the sake of tempo. They use tight ends. They run the football. They establish the line of scrimmage. And some of that also takes some pressure off the defense. So they can go fast. But if you talk to those guys, I think what they like is the varied approach. They don't want to just go one speed. They want to be able to get into third gear, into fourth gear, into fifth gear. And depending on the score, depending on the defense, depending on what they're doing well offensively that day, they can adjust to see how fast they need to go. So it's not just like hit them. It can be that, but I think he's got multiple pitches he can throw in those regards.
One thing that's I'm always interested in when these new coaches kind of come in, whether it's integrating with the players or the coaches, whatever it might be, just their personalities and how it fits or doesn't fit. What would you say, Coach Dawson, his personality, some things, essentially, what are you going to have to do to play for Coach Dawson? What are some things he preaches and really are points of emphasis for him as a coach?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's detail. He's a very detail-oriented guy, and that goes back to the air raid. It's one of those, we're going to do, like the Bruce Lee quote, like I'd rather face a guy that has done 10,000, different kicks one time rather than a guy who does one kick 10,000 times. Like that air raid has concepts in it that they're going to run over and over and over again. And to be good in that offense, to play for Shannon Dawson, you need to know where you're going to be. You need to know where you need to be and how to get there and how to do it out of different formations. So he's going to be a detail-oriented guy where how you do stuff and doing it correctly is very important.
You touched on Clayton Tune. He's obviously the guy that he worked with closely at Houston there. His development statistically, obviously we see improvements year after year. Was a passing leader there in the conference this past season, individual passing leader. What did you notice with Clayton, his development, and then, what was working so well, again, with the offensive coordinator, kind of the connection with the quarterback with Clayton there?
Yeah, so I think a thing to remember with Clayton Tune is he was not a highly recruited, highly touted guy. He kind of got thrown into the fire with a name you're probably familiar with when Greg Ward left Houston, right? And so when D'Eriq King left Houston to go to Miami, he kind of became that guy. He got thrust in the middle of the year when King set out, to keep his eligibility. And early on in his career, Clayton Tune was known as a guy who would give up the football. He was as likely to throw it to your team as he was to throw it to my team, right? And that got better and better. And that goes back to what Dawson's talked about with experienced quarterbacks. When Dana Holgorsen and Shannon Dawson have had experienced quarterbacks who do not turn over the ball, they are a top 20 offense in the nation. They tend to win 8, 9, 10 games, and they're really good. When they've had inexperienced quarterbacks who throw the football to the other team and commit turnovers, they've struggled. And so I think one of the things with him is just figuring out that partnership with the quarterback and figuring out how not to turn over the football and how to go score points. I mean, they're going to score 30-plus points a game. You just hope that you're not giving the other team an opportunity to score 30-plus points a game. So he wants a guy who's going to not be a game manager, but somebody who can go make explosive plays, but also somebody who can use his feet, get out of trouble, and doesn't mind throwing the ball away.
Is there anything in particular that Clayton either mentioned over the years with his development that he credited Coach Dawson with, and you're touching on, the interceptions, and clearly that was much better, but was there anything in particular that stood out to you in that front?
Yeah, it's kind of along these lines, but we did a feature on Clayton Tune going into the year last year. And one of the things he talked about was just learning that punting was okay because we're going to go score points. Like Shannon would go to him and be like, look, you don't have to make that throw into coverage. Because when we get the ball back, we're going to go score again. Nobody holds us under 20 points. Like we're going to have plenty of opportunities to go do this. So, I think he's somebody who allows the quarterback to be himself, right? Instead of, hey, you're going to do everything that I want to do really well. It's more of let's figure out what you do really well, and then let's do that a bunch of times. And I think the offensive coordinators in college football that have success are those kind of guys where it's not, round peg, square hole type of deal. It's more of, let's break you down. Let's figure out what you do really well. Let's figure out what you don't do very well. And let's only do the stuff you do well, and let's avoid the stuff you struggle with. And I think he's done a great job of that over the last couple of years with Clayton Tune.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting. And kind of going back to the D'Eriq King thing. Yeah, you mentioned 2019. That Dawson was there during that time, just a little bit of overlap, a little bit of the Miami standpoint there. From a Miami standpoint, listening to everything about Clayton Tune, Miami's got their quarterback back with Tyler Van Dyke, looking to get back to that 2021 form compared to what happened last year, changing offenses. This will be his third straight offense in 3 years. So we'll see how he does with the adjustment there. I'm fascinated by what you're going to say about Nathaniel Dell there at wide receiver. Speaking on him specifically in this offense, you touched on some scheme things that you like, but also the wide receivers in general? How many typically are on the field? What's he kind of looking for from a wide receiver standpoint in this offense?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be at least 3, usually 4 on the field. They also use a tight end pretty regularly. That's a different thing from the old school air raid of Hal Mummy and stuff. I think the tight end, Christian Trahan had a lot of good numbers for Houston over the last couple of years. But what I love what they do with their wide receivers, kind of what we were talking about earlier. Not only do they put them in space in order to complete the ball, but they put them in space and they put them in positions to where then they can go make the play once they have the ball. Those guys, turn into running backs once they have the ball. So they do a decent amount of screen game stuff on the outside. They do a lot of mesh for vertical stuff that we're all used to seeing. Nathaniel Dell was excellent. One of the more productive wide receivers in the state. And that's another thing that I love about the Shannon Dawson offense. He doesn't get too cute, right? If you have a dude, you're going to throw it to that dude. And he didn't try to spread it around just on purpose to spread it around. He gave Nathaniel Dell 100-plus catches a year the last 2 years. And I think the second closest on the team was around 35 or 40. So if he has somebody who he thinks can be that number one wide receiver, he's going to line him up. He's going to rely on it. I would imagine, I don't know Miami's roster all that well, but if I'm a slot receiver, I'm throwing a party today because they have always done a really good job with their inside receivers. Dana Holgerson at his core is an inside receiver coach. And I think Shannon Dawson has picked up a lot of that stuff where Tavon Austin back at West Virginia when those guys were together, Nathaniel Dell down here in Houston. And so you're gonna get targets on the slot. You're gonna get them on the tight end, and on the outside they use a lot of screens. They use a lot of vertical stuff.
Yeah, arguably Miami's best receiver is their slot guy, and Xavier Restrepo. He dealt with injuries last year. Close friends, everybody knows, really close friends with Tyler Van Dyke, so I'm sure they're both excited. Also, Brashard Smith put up some numbers, and then a new freshman. I think it's going to be exciting. Nathaniel Joseph in this office from a Miami standpoint, highly regarded recruit, freshman jumping into here. This will be a new offense for everybody else, but this will be the only one that he's seen in college. So it'll be interesting to see how things go from a Miami standpoint at the wide receiver position. Mike, the thing that's standing out to me, and I'm sure viewers or listeners are paying attention to, is running the ball. Coach Cristobal got to Miami, wanted to run the ball. It didn't work out. Maybe a little bit of improvement from last year, but not where they wanted to be. Miami's not had a top 5 rushing attack in the ACC in over a decade here. What can they do? I don't know if the numbers are necessarily going to be there automatically because they are going to throw the ball, obviously. But some efficiency things I think will be the things to look for. And again, looking at numbers, the improvements with yards per carry, that got better there at Houston. The running game, why is it important in this offense? Why does Coach Dawson like to use the running game, and why is he not ignoring it?
Yeah, if I'm a Miami fan, I would not look at the 2022 numbers at running back. They had so many injuries. They just kind of had to ride Clayton Tune in that passing offense. But if you go back to 2021, when they won 12 games, a lot of it was because of the running back room. Alton McCaskill was a true freshman that year, and he broke every single Houston record in terms of touches, in terms of yards, in terms of touchdowns. They use the running backs in the passing game. They use them in the running game. They go between the tackles. They go outside the tackles. A lot of zone, split zone, all that kind of stuff. And so I think he wants to be more balanced. As I said earlier, those guys joke about getting kicked out of the air raids because they want to run the football. It makes it easier on the quarterback. It makes it easier on the defense to play complementary football. I think that just kind of dawned on me what should have happened earlier is, it's a lot like what Rhett Lashley ran, right? Like it's a similar system to what Rhett Lashley wants to do, spread it out. He's got some air raid tendencies, but also a Gus Malzahn disciple in terms of running the football. And so I think it's going to be pretty similar to that, where it's a spread offense, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, sometimes 2, 4 wide receivers on the field, but they're not going to neglect the running game if they have talent back there. And that running back isn't going to just be a running back. He's going to be a wide receiver as well. They're going to do some of that Debo Samuel positionless football stuff where you'll see a running back line up in the slot on the outside. Sometimes they'll have 2 on the field, but neither one of them are in the backfield. And so he does a good job of using formations and personnel to create mismatches, because that's all the offense is, right? Is trying to figure out a way to get your guy on the defensive guy that they don't want on there, and then you just attack that moment.
Obviously with Mario Cristobal, his connection to being an offensive lineman, coaching that position, he's down there in the practice fields, down there quite a bit. Alex Mirabal as well, the offensive line coach. So they'll obviously have their hands still on that line. But maybe what does the offensive line look under Coach Dawson at Houston? What does the O-line look like? What are some things that he tends to look for in a lineman?
Yeah, I think he wants them to be athletic. He wants them to be able to move a lot. As I mentioned, they use the screen game a little bit. They get on the edges. They use some zone running schemes, and you want your guys to be able to run there. But it'll be interesting to see once he's at a place that can recruit like Miami can recruit. Like Houston doesn't have 5-star offensive tackles. Like they are a G5 football team. I know they're moving to the Big 12 this next year, but offensive line is the hardest position to recruit at the G5 level, right? Like there's not many 6'7", 300-pound dancing bears that find themselves in the American. Like those dudes play in the SEC, they play in the ACC or the Big 12, Pac-12, and so I think when he gets those kind of star offensive linemen, maybe we have a better idea of how he wants to use those guys. But they've been one of the best units in the American. They've done a lot with less, and they've had plenty of guys be first-team all-conference and be guys that are going to get drafted and stuff like that. But they don't get the first pick of the barrel. At Miami, he's going to have talent on the offensive line that he's never had before. It will be interesting to see how he uses that luxury.
You mentioned recruiting, talent, acquisition. Any stories that stand out to you as far as coach being a recruiter?
Houston's in a weird spot, right? Because it's a metro area that puts out a lot of talent. So you would think, well, wow, they must recruit really well. Well, they're usually in the 70s or the 60s at Houston because, a lot of those guys want to go play in the Big 12 or want to go play in the SEC. In 1995, the Southwest Conference broke up and Houston's kind of been in purgatory ever since. And they're just now kind of getting out of that going into 2024. And so they've done more of their best work on in the transfer portal, probably than on the recruiting ground. But he's in charge of wide receivers a lot of times. And their best recruits and their best players over the last 3 or 4 years have been wide receivers. Matthew Golden, Tank Dell, as we mentioned. They got a couple in this recruiting cycle that they were very excited about. So he can recruit, obviously. But I think at Miami, he's going to have the ability to go recruit in a way that he never has at any of the stops he's been at before.
That sounds like great stuff. Mike, a lot of insight. I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and we'll talk to you later.
Of course. Appreciate y'all.